This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silenced them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 100, Sterling Koehn, Part 1. When Zachary Koehn called 911 on the afternoon of August 30th, 2017, reporting his infant son appeared to be dead, first responders could never have guessed the horror that awaited them. In the back bedroom of an apartment in Alta Vista, Iowa, separate from the room shared by Zachary, his girlfriend Cheyanne, and their 20-month-old daughter, sat a powered infant swing facing the back wall of the room. In that swing was the body of 4-month-old Sterling Koehn, emaciated, stiff with rigor, the soft spots on his head sunken from dehydration. His diaper hadn't been changed in several days, which had attracted flies, and the filthy blankets and clothing covering Sterling's body crawled with maggots. This is the story of a baby boy whose parents valued their meth use and the care of their toddler daughter over the life of their newborn son. It's also the story of a little boy who was doomed from the start, but whose tragically short life touched the hearts of people around the world and who will never be forgotten. This is part 1 of the horrific story of Sterling Koehn. Before I get started with Sterling's story, I'd like to thank my newest patrons, Debbie O. from Everett, Washington, Laura H. from Sacramento, California, Brittany G. from Modesto, California, Charlie S. from Hull, England, Ashley E. from Granville, Queensland, Australia, Destiny H. from Middletown, Ohio, Nicole T. from Shavertown, Pennsylvania, Susan M. from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and from The Shire, Bobby R., Shauna B., Jasmine R., and Aaron W. Thank you all so much for your support. I'm honestly so grateful to everyone who supports the show in any way, and that includes every last one of my listeners. On February 2nd, about 3 weeks before the show's second anniversary, I reached a huge milestone by surpassing 1 million total downloads. I'm blown away to have reached that landmark within the first 2 years of the show's beginning. Suffer the Little Children, both the podcast and the blog, has always been a labor of love for me, so I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have reached so many people with my little one-woman show that I research, write, record, edit, distribute, market, and everything else all by myself. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for helping me to keep these kids' memories alive and to raise awareness of the signs of child abuse in the hopes of preventing future tragedies. Today's episode marks another milestone too, of course, my 100th episode. Because I wanted to do something special for episode 100, I've chosen to tell the story that's been most requested by listeners of the podcast and readers of the blog. It's worth mentioning that throughout the case, I've heard the last name pronounced Koehn more often than not, but since I've heard Zachary and his family members themselves pronounce it Koehn, I will be using that pronunciation. Over this episode and the next, I hope to do baby Sterling justice. His story is among the most horrific I've ever told, and it's not hard to understand why his story received international attention. Be forewarned, this episode will be full of extremely disturbing details. Sterling Daniel Koehn was born on May 1st, 2017, in the bathtub belonging to a friend of his parents, Cheyanne Renee Harris and Zachary Paul Koehn. According to Zachary, as soon as Sterling was born, he was taken by ambulance to a hospital in nearby Cresco, Iowa, from where he was transferred to Mercy Hospital in Mason City because he had water in his lungs. While in the hospital, a test uncovered the presence of methamphetamine in Sterling's umbilical cord. This finding, for whatever reason, was not reported to the proper authorities, even though, as mandatory reporters, hospital staff was legally required to notify the Department of Human Services of possible child abuse. Had it been reported, I might not be telling Sterling's story right now. According to American Addiction Centers, meth can increase the risk of pregnancy complications. It can decrease the placental blood flow, causing fetal hypoxia, which means not enough oxygen gets to the fetus's brain. Meth use during pregnancy can cause a baby to have a low birth weight, to be small for its gestational age, or to have a higher risk for problems with brain development. Other problems the baby may have include preterm birth, placental abruption, heart problems, a smaller than normal head circumference, fetal distress, and restriction of fetal growth. A 2011 study by the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that newborns exposed to meth in utero may be at a higher risk of future cognitive and behavioral problems. These babies are harder to arouse, but once awake, they're difficult to calm. Reportedly, Zachary did not initially believe Sterling was his biological son because the baby's complexion was much lighter than Zachary's. It should be noted that Cheyanne's coloring is extremely light. It was later determined that Zachary was indeed Sterling's biological father. Cheyanne, at least, was apparently excited about the baby. On one of her Facebook profiles, she posted an ultrasound image prior to Sterling's birth, commenting that she was hoping for a boy. Shortly after Sterling was born, in order for Zachary to be closer to work, the family moved from Riceville into an apartment in Alta Vista, a town in northern Iowa that is about 125 miles or 200 kilometers northeast of Iowa's capital city, Des Moines. Their apartment, unit number 7, was one of 4 units located in the one-story brick building at 304 East Wilson Street. Jennifer Schriever, a clerk at the local gas station who lived in another building in the same complex, met Cheyanne and her toddler daughter shortly after the family moved to Alta Vista and offered to babysit the couple's 2 children. Each of the 2 times she babysat, she watched the children for 16 hours, both times overnight. Cheyanne seemed to have it together at the time, even showing Jennifer a notebook containing information on how to care for the children. Jennifer said, "It just seemed strange that they'd leave them that long with someone who just lives across the way and offered up babysitting services to them." The second time she babysat for the kids, she said of Cheyanne, "She came over, handed me the baby. I took him and kind of did the arm gesture. He seemed kind of light. And she noticed that I did that, and she came and said, 'We've been having problems with formula and gaining weight, but we think we got it under control.' And I never questioned it, but that baby seemed tiny to me." Sterling had no problem taking a bottle for Jennifer and ate well in her opinion. That was the last time Jennifer was asked to care for Sterling and his sister. At 12:57 p.m. on Wednesday, August 30th, 2017, Zachary Koehn called 911, telling dispatcher Kathy Knutson that his infant son was dead, possibly from sudden infant death syndrome, and requesting an ambulance. I've recreated the 911 call with the help of the marvelous Kevin from the Jury Room podcast, whose promo you'll hear later on in this episode. Chickasaw County 911.
Yeah, this is Zach Koehn. I need an ambulance sent out here to my apartment.
Okay, what's your address, Zach?
107 South Hilltop Avenue in Alta Vista.
Okay, what's going on?
Around 9, my girlfriend went to see the son, and then, about 11:30, she went to check on him, and he was gone.
Gone, meaning?
He died.
Okay.
I said, he's at, probably 4 months. I don't know if it's sudden death syndrome or what.
Okay, so you live at 107 South Hilltop in Alta Vista?
Apartment 7.
Apartment 7, okay. And your son is 4 months old, and the last time that he was checked on was 9?
No, it was. She fed him at 9.
Okay.
And, she hadn't heard him. She went to check on him, and she hadn't heard him cry or whatever. And probably about 11:30 or 11:40, she'd, went to check on him, and he's passed away.
Okay, so that's the last time they checked on him, okay.
Pretty sure that's the last time she checked. She just woke me up. I'm in shock. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll get them paged out, okay? I'm going to send an ambulance and everybody up there, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick note. Zachary gave his address as 107 South Hilltop Avenue when, in fact, the couple lived in apartment 7 at 304 East Wilson Street. The apartment complex consisted of 3 buildings, each of which had its own separate address, which most likely accounts for the discrepancy. The other thing I wanted to point out is the weirdly detached way Zachary referred to Sterling as the son. That would later be brought up at trial as evidence of his detachment from the baby, who he didn't entirely believe was his biological son. When Chickasaw County Sheriff's deputies and emergency medical personnel responded to the apartment, there was no way to prepare them for what they found. In a warm, dark back bedroom, separate from the one shared by Zachary, Cheyanne, and their 20-month-old daughter, first responders took note of a mattress leaning against the wall, a car seat, and various other items strewn across the floor. At the back of the room sat a soiled electric baby swing, facing the back wall of the bedroom. In that swing was the body of baby Sterling, his lap covered with a blanket. His little arms were raised, his hands fisted, his body stiff, and his eyes were wide open and staring at nothing. Sterling's clothing included a blue onesie bearing a cartoon cow and the words, "Let's play," and a pair of tiny camouflage pants. Zachary told deputies that Cheyanne, his girlfriend and the mother of his children, had fed Sterling at around 9 o'clock that morning, at which point he was fine. A couple hours later, when she checked on the baby between 11 and 11:30 a.m., she found Sterling dead. The day Sterling died, Zachary and Cheyenne's phones were confiscated by police, and they were forced to vacate their apartment, which was considered a crime scene, so they temporarily moved into a motel. At the same time, their healthy, chubby toddler daughter was removed from the home by the Department of Human Services and placed in foster care. It was later revealed that Zachary also had a 7-year-old son from a previous marriage, but the little boy was in the custody of Zachary's parents in Oklahoma. Relatives said Zachary gave his parents custody of his son because of concerns that his then-wife could not care for the little boy due to mental issues.
With cocaine, one snort, and it just owned my body and soul. Something in my system wanted that, and once cocaine was there, it was like the missing link. Click. Like when you turn on lights, it's on or off. There's no halfway. Cocaine was like my on switch. Stephen King. Some people understand that feeling of an on switch that Stephen King describes. It's a need, a compulsion, an overwhelming drive for some of us who dared to dance with the allure of a substance that could make us forget our pain, suffering, grief, and heartache. It's a dance with the devil that some of us sign willingly, knowing that the next big hit, the next big high, could be our last, but still doing it anyway. Still chasing that dream in hopes of leaving ourselves behind and losing oneself to the drift of a high. Some of us come away from the chase, realizing that at some point, something has to change. Something has to give, or we will lose our lives to following that high. Some of us are never able to stop. Never able to stop the pursuit of that demon that lures us in with promises of escaping the prisons of our lives. Join us for our upcoming series on the struggles of addiction, and where we explore our very human need to escape our lives and fall down into the spiral of drugs and alcoholism, even if that spiral may one day lead to our very own demise at the hands of a compulsion we cannot control. If you or a loved one has been struggling with addiction or has in the past and would like to share your story, please feel free to reach out to me via social media or through email at juryroompodcast@gmail.com. Welcome to Addicted, a Jury Room production, coming soon to wherever you listen to this podcast.
Hours after Sterling was discovered dead, Cheyanne spoke with DCI Special Agent Chris Calloway for 2 hours in his vehicle. When he asked if she took any medication, Cheyanne said, "No. After our daughter, I did get started on antidepressants for like a week. But oh man, I was constantly nauseous, and a couple of times I threw up, so I stopped taking them." Agent Calloway asked if Cheyanne self-medicated using anything like marijuana or methamphetamine, to which she said, "I did. Honestly, I did. Before I met Zach, it was really, really hard into pot. When I met Zach, he opened my eyes to the fact it was just making my depression worse. And then I have tried methamphetamine." Cheyanne admitted she had smoked meth in the time frame since Sterling's birth. Regarding baby formula, Cheyanne said Sterling used a special formula for sensitive stomachs, which she sometimes stretched by adding regular formula, mixing 1 scoop of the normal and 1 scoop of the sensitive because I needed it to last until Zach gets paid this weekend. She said Sterling did not seem to suffer ill effects from the concoction.
How many feedings would Sterling have a day?
But normally it would be 3 or 4 of the 8-ounce things.
Okay. How warm was the room?
It was comfortable. It didn't seem too hot to me.
Cheyanne told Agent Calloway, I should have checked on him more. She didn't, she explained, because he always lets me know when he needs something, so I didn't think anything of it.
If you were to predict what the doctors will find, what do you think they...
Zach keeps saying something about sudden death syndrome.
Okay.
Agent Calloway later spoke with Law and Crime, saying,
I didn't have any preconceived notions about what had happened. And as she started talking, I was just left with that gap in time. I mean, so we're looking at 19 hours with no care of a newborn.
Other occupants of the apartment building told the press that Zachary, Cheyanne, and their children had lived in apartment 7 for under a year and kept to themselves. Kevin Trumpold, their neighbor across the hall, said, It's a terrible tragedy that this happened. He said he couldn't comprehend people who didn't feed or care for their children. As for his neighbors, Kevin said he only saw Zachary, Cheyanne, and the children when they were leaving or returning home. Sterling was always in an infant seat being carried to or from the couple's vehicle. He rarely saw the couple's young daughter playing outside, and he didn't remember them having any visitors. Although he worked odd hours, he had noticed the TV was always on in apartment 7. He occasionally heard crying coming from inside the apartment, although he wasn't sure if it was a child or the television. Cam Haar and Bella Snyder, who lived down the hall from apartment 7 with their then 11-month-old child, said they never saw Sterling or his big sister and had no idea the horrors taking place in the family's apartment. Cam told USA Today, It's sick. You couldn't put anything else in the newspaper. Being a father myself, there's no way to explain it. Cheyanne had no criminal history to speak of, and the only crime on Zachary's record was from Mitchell County in September of 2016, when he was accused of illegally bypassing the city's water meter at his trailer home in Riceville after the utility had been turned off for non-payment. The charge of second-degree theft was dismissed in February of 2017 after Zachary agreed to pay $1,600 in restitution to the city, plus court costs. In August, the Mitchell County Attorney's Office requested that the court find Zachary in contempt, as he had not been making payments as agreed. Zachary told authorities he had recently begun working as a truck driver. Cheyanne at the time was unemployed. Both parents told authorities that Cheyanne was Sterling's primary caretaker, while Zachary worked long hours supporting his family. In a criminal complaint, Chickasaw County Sheriff's Chief Deputy Reed Palo wrote, On arrival, it was confirmed that Sterling Daniel Koehn had died. The infant was found seated in a powered swing/seat in a bedroom separate from where Zachary, Cheyanne, and their older child slept. Sterling Daniel Koehn was born May 1, 2017. In subsequent statements made by Zachary Koehn and Cheyanne Harris, they claimed Sterling had actually been checked on last the previous day, August 29, 2017. On the morning of August 31, 2017, the body of Sterling Daniel Koehn underwent an autopsy at the State Medical Examiner's office in Ankeny, Iowa. At the time of the autopsy, it was learned that the infant had died at a weight of 3,152 grams, under 7 pounds, and was 35.5 centimeters in length, 14 inches. Both these measurements placed the infant at well below the 5th percentile in size and weight. Sterling's body was found to have maggots in various stages of development in his clothing and on his skin. Identification and study of the maggots found on the body was conducted by a forensic entomologist and used to provide a timeline. The study of the maggots' growth and development indicated that the child had not had a diaper change, bath, or been removed from the seat in over a week. Investigation of the incident led to the discovery that the parents' account of the death of the child was inconsistent with the findings of the autopsy and investigation. The state medical examiner has ruled the death a homicide. The cause of death was a failure to provide critical care. The facts of this case go far beyond neglect and show circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to human life. What this comes down to is the fact that Sterling, who would have been 4 months old on September 1st, died from neglect, including malnutrition, dehydration, and infection from diaper rash. His diaper rash was so severe that it extended from the middle of his back down to his knees and had caused his skin to rupture, allowing bacteria to set in and cause a massive infection. Following a 2-month investigation involving the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the State Medical Examiner's Office, the Chickasaw County Medical Examiner, and the Chickasaw County Sheriff's Department, on Wednesday, October 25, 2017, arrest warrants were issued for both 20-year-old Cheyanne Harris and 28-year-old Zachary Koehn. The Chickasaw County Sheriff's Office, with assistance from the Charles City Police Department, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office, and the Mitchell County Sheriff's Office, located Cheyanne in Riceville and Zachary in Charles City, placing both under arrest on charges of first-degree murder, a Class A felony, and child endangerment causing death, a Class B felony. Zachary was booked into Chickasaw County Jail and Cheyanne into Bremer County Jail, both on a cash-only bond of $100,000 each. According to court filings, at the time of her arrest, Cheyanne's legal address was at her mother's home in Riceville, while Zachary's address was still the East Wilson Street apartment. Following the arrests, as is often the case, members of the public took issue with the length of time it took authorities to file charges. Chickasaw Sheriff Marty Heeman addressed these concerns at a meeting of the Chickasaw County Board of Supervisors, saying, "We always need to be thorough in our investigation. We have to make sure we are fact-based, not emotional, when we file charges." The Sheriff's Department, in conjunction with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, needed to build a solid case before charges could be filed, including waiting for scientific and investigative research to be completed. "We have to have all of our ducks in a row. Our people need to bounce things off the DCI, and we needed to make sure we were on the same page as the prosecutors. We took our time. We have to build a case before we file charges." After the couple's arrest, Zachary's brother, Danny Koehn, spoke with USA Today, telling the reporter he knew his brother and Cheyanne had drug problems. Danny said Zachary was frequently out of the home for days at a time with his trucking job. "I talked to Zach a lot. He did have concerns about the child being taken care of while he was gone. He'd call and say the baby wasn't changed for a week when he wasn't home. It's still the responsibility of the parents of the child, so I'm not saying he's innocent." I was unable to find any indication that Danny contacted DHS regarding Zachary's claims that Cheyanne neglected Sterling while he was out of the house working. Danny spoke with Zachary after his arrest and said his brother was happy that local strangers were showing up at the jail to pray for him. He told me, "I think the public realizes I'm not as bad a person as they think." But I told him, "No, people do that all the time. They come to prison to pray for prisoners. This is serious. It will be a miracle for you to get out of jail. I honestly think he will spend the rest of his life in prison." The week after the arrests, the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier reported that Department of Correctional Services reports filed with the court revealed that Zachary was in substance abuse treatment and claimed he had last used methamphetamine the week before Sterling's death. Cheyanne was also in treatment. She said she last used meth 2 to 3 weeks prior to her arrest. She also said she was in treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. Amanda Reynolds, who told Heavy she had known Zachary for 10 years, said, "Zach was a very nice, mellow human being. He came from a good family." When she first met Zachary, Amanda said, he was not on meth but later became addicted, and she believed his addiction is what led to Sterling's death. When she heard the news, she said she knew he killed Sterling. The last time I talked to him is when Sterling was born. He mentioned he wasn't sure if he was the dad. I knew they killed him. It hurt because I can see all their Facebook activity, and they wanted sympathy from everyone. It's heartbreaking. I have 2 kids, and I can't imagine doing this to them. Had I known, I would have taken Sterling in a heartbeat." As for Cheyanne, Amanda said, "I'd seen her before, but never talked to her. She seemed kind of troubled, torn between her family and Zach." It's interesting to note that on one of Cheyanne's Facebook profiles, she wrote in her bio that she was a full-time mom, and on another, she wrote, "Mommy forever." Speaking of Facebook, between August 30th and October 24th, 2017, Zachary posted frequently. He did occasionally mention his son's death and funeral, but he often posted memes and status updates about mundane things like going out to dinner. In one post on September 21st, Zachary referenced the couple's daughter, who was taken by DHS immediately after Sterling's death. Along with a photo of himself with the little girl, Zachary posted, "Got to see my little girl. We get to see her again for a little bit tomorrow." In the comments on the post, he added, "Mommy gets to see her Tuesday, and then they decide when we get to have regular visits and how often." Using Zachary's Facebook account, Cheyanne also commented on the post. "They took her the night we lost Sterling. Never got to say goodbye. Last she saw me, I was bawling my eyes out." On October 3rd of the same year, Zachary posted a photo of himself sitting next to Cheyanne, who was displaying a new forearm tattoo. He captioned the photo, "Loving the clean life," commenting below, "It really is so much better. Hard to stay awake at times, but we get past it." A candlelight vigil was organized in Sterling's memory on Saturday, November 4th, 2017, in Alta Vista. Cheyanne and Zachary's preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place on November 14th in Chickasaw County District Court. The two would ultimately be tried separately.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Carter-Landine, the host and producer of True Consequences podcast. Do you like true crime but not sensationalism? Do you like well-researched stories? True Consequences is a true crime podcast with stories based in New Mexico and the American desert Southwest. I come at these stories from an empathetic lens because 3 decades ago, my baby brother Jacob was murdered and his killer was never prosecuted. You see, I understand what it's like to seek justice for a loved one. I hope you'll give True Consequences a chance. You can find me wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
The trials of Zachary Koehn and Cheyanne Harris would be delayed several times. Early on, it was determined that the pair would be tried separately, with Zachary's trial taking place first, so any time his trial was postponed, Cheyanne's was as well, out of necessity. In April of 2018, Zachary's attorney, public defender Steve Drahozel of Dubuque, requested his client's trial be moved out of Chickasaw County, citing over 2,500 newspaper articles in addition to television and radio coverage, which the attorney claimed would make it impossible to impanel an unbiased jury. Prosecutors did not oppose the request, simply asking the court to choose a new venue in a community of similar size and character to Chickasaw County. Drahozel also asked the court to ban allegations of illegal drug use and domestic abuse during Zachary's trial, saying he expected the state to attempt to enter such evidence, but that it was hearsay and would be unfairly prejudicial. The defense's motion to change the trial venue was ultimately granted. In May of 2018, a notice filed in Chickasaw County Court by Cheyenne's attorney, Aaron Hawbaker, indicated his client may lean on a diminished responsibility or intoxication defense, naming Ames psychologist Art Konar as a defense witness. Also in the filing, the attorney requested Cheyenne's trial, which was scheduled to begin in June, be postponed due to a schedule conflict. Another of Mr. Hawbaker's clients, Chad Little, faced first-degree murder charges in June in an unrelated child death case in Black Hawk County District Court. In that case, Mr. Little was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and child endangerment causing death for delivering a fatal head injury to his girlfriend's daughter, 4-year-old Gracie Buss, in May of 2015. In July of 2018, the state sought termination of Cheyanne and Zachary's parental rights to their daughter. Court records showed that after the little girl was removed from the home following her brother's death, a hair test returned a positive result for methamphetamine, as did tests of both parents' hair. Zachary evidently accepted the termination, but Cheyanne appealed, arguing that her financial situation prevented her from posting bail in the murder case, which meant she was unable to participate in the DHS programs and services required for her to be reunited with her daughter. The matter of termination would not be decided until after both trials were completed. Leading up to Zachary Koehn's trial, the defense subpoenaed Cheyanne to testify during his trial, causing her attorney to invoke Cheyenne's Fifth Amendment right, saying, "Nobody from the state or the defense can call her simply to take the stand and assert the Fifth, so we are asserting her right against self-incrimination." At a pretrial hearing in mid-October of 2018, Zachary's defense team told the court they had hired an expert on postpartum depression to testify as a witness. Prosecutor and Assistant Iowa Attorney General Denise Timmons asked the judge to disallow any evidence relating to Cheyanne's mental state, while attorney Stephen Drahozel argued that Cheyanne's mental health was relevant because while his client believed his girlfriend was caring for the baby, in fact, she wasn't, due to postpartum depression. Mr. Drahozel said, "The mental health status of that parent, we think, is extremely important to whether or not Mr. Koehn denied care to the child. This is relevant to whether Mr. Koehn acted appropriately and willingly in denying care to his child, and whether he was inquiring and what information he was being given, who the primary caretaker was, what kind of care was being given." The defense attorney also sought to exclude some crime scene photos of Sterling in the apartment and some autopsy photos from being shown to the jury. He said, "The photographs of the deceased are gruesome and don't go to prove the nature of the death." Instead, he said, the medical examiner and members of law enforcement could describe to the jurors the condition of Sterling's body and his cause of death without evoking the horrific photographs. Prosecutor Timmons argued that the photos were important in answering questions about the time and manner of the baby's death, saying, "It's the state's position that the state of the child at the time of his death is absolutely relevant in this case. There is going to be a lot of discussion from the experts regarding the timing and how long when certain things began to happen to the child." Judge Richard Stokel, who had not seen the photos himself, asked, "Woefully underweight, is that the allegation?" Timmons confirmed, "Underweight, but also basically decaying." The defense also wanted to exclude evidence of Zachary's alleged drug use and sales, saying that information would be highly prejudicial. Timmons argued the drug evidence, which included a witness and text messages, could be used to counter claims the defendant and his girlfriend did not have the resources to care for Sterling, saying, "We have to prove that he was not caring for his child and he made a choice to do other things. We think it's highly relevant. Also, if there are issues regarding whether or not they could afford diapers or afford food, we have ample evidence that he was selling drugs, so it was income besides the income that he had from his job." The judge would rule at a later date on the matters brought up at the pretrial hearing. The week before the trial was to begin, Attorney Drahozel requested the court reconsider the jury pool, claiming Latino and Hispanic people were underrepresented in the current pool, which violated Zachary's right to an impartial jury. Because Zachary's background was Hispanic or Latino, the attorney argued, he was entitled to a jury selected from a fair cross-section of the community. Statistics show that Henry County, where the trial was to take place and from which the jury would be chosen, is 92.7% white, while Hispanic or Latino people comprise only 4.9% of the population. However, Drahozel argued that of the 82 people who indicated their race on the jury questionnaire, only 2 people marked Hispanic or Latino, and one of those did not speak English. Judge Richard Stokel ultimately dismissed the defense's challenge. The murder trial of 29-year-old Zachary Paul Koehn began with jury selection on Monday, October 29, 2018, at the Henry County Courthouse in Mount Pleasant. During jury selection, prosecutor Denise Timmons asked potential jurors if they had relatives in law enforcement or in the medical field, or if anyone had a background in entomology, as well as asking about the possible jurors' parenting experience and if anyone present had never changed a diaper. By the end of the day, a panel of 7 men and 7 women, 2 of whom would serve as alternate jurors, was selected for the jury. During opening statements on Tuesday, October 30, 2018, Prosecutor and Assistant Attorney General Coleman McAllister said in part,
"Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that on May 1st, 2017, the defendant received a blessing. Born to him and his living girlfriend Cheyanne Harris was a son. The defendant and his living girlfriend welcomed this child to their home. When the defendant was granted the blessing of that child, he was also granted a responsibility. Little Sterling, was as vulnerable as only an infant could be. He was completely dependent on everybody in his life that cared for him. The defendant, his father, and the other caretakers. Little Sterling couldn't feed himself. He couldn't change his diaper. He couldn't regulate his temperature if he was cold or hot. He couldn't put clean clothes on. He couldn't make sure that he was safe. If he needed medical attention, he got it. He was vulnerable as only an infant can be. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that this defendant, this father, whose responsibility it was to care for little Sterling, failed in his responsibilities. He failed. The evidence in this case will show by his actions, he directly caused Sterling's death. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to show that little Sterling was placed in a swing in a stuffy, hot room in that apartment, that he was left in the same diaper for at least 9, maybe 14 days. He was left in that diaper full of stool, such that it attracted bugs, flies that laid their eggs in that diaper, which eggs hatched into maggots while Sterling was alive. And those maggots were in his clothes and in his diaper, feeding on the feces in his diaper. And he laid in that room, in that diaper, between 9 and 14 days. And the evidence will show that that stool in his diaper irritated his skin, such that it ruptured the skin and his bodily fluids came out. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to show that Sterling died of malnutrition. He was under 7 pounds at almost 40 months of age, on the 5th percentile in the Grower chart. He died of dehydration because he wasn't fed, and he didn't get water or hydration through milk, and because of his injuries. And ladies and gentlemen, he died of diaper rash. That's right, diaper rash. The evidence is going to show that that feces he sat in that diaper ate through his skin, allowing E. coli bacteria that was in his diaper and in the stools to enter his bloodstream and cause an infection. Malnutrition, dehydration, infection caused by diaper rash. That's what caused this child's death. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that this defendant, the father of that child, is responsible for that death. This was not an accident. That was a cover story concocted by this defendant to cover the awful truth. You're not going to hear this is a case where the defendant didn't have ample resources to care for the child. Ladies and gentlemen, this case at its heart is about actions and consequences. Actions and consequences. It's about the defendant's actions and what he did to little Sterling. Ladies and gentlemen, the consequences of his actions were that Sterling lost his life.
During the defense's opening statement, defense attorney Les Blair III said,
"A tragedy, not a crime, is what we expect the evidence to show. I'm going to keep this short. As you already heard, this case is about the death of a child. Nothing anybody says throughout this trial is going to soften that. It's a terrible thing. The problem is, of course, that a tragedy like this creates a gut reaction in us. We want to punish somebody. There's an automatic tendency to what we refer to as rush to judgment. As jurors, it is your responsibility, it is your job not to do that. You need to make sure that you keep an open mind, that you listen to all the evidence, and that you don't draw any conclusions or reach any conclusions until after you've heard everything.
Testimony in the trial began with 911 dispatcher Kathy Knutson, followed by first responders who found baby Sterling in his swing. The first to arrive at the apartment on August 30th, 2017, was Tony Friedrich, a 35-year nurse and a medic with the Chickasaw County Rescue Squad, who became emotional and began breaking down even before her testimony began, as well as several times throughout. Tony told the jury that as she was on her way to the scene in her personal vehicle, she was thinking about performing CPR and other life-saving measures.
They didn't show any emotion or expression, and then the man said, "Inside," And I said, show me. He took me to a back bedroom, and it was dark and hot. It was stuffy. And I was looking for a crib, and I couldn't see anything. And I said, we've got to get some lights on in here, because you couldn't see anything because it was dark. He flipped on the switch, and the lights came on, and then as he was walking away, he muttered something, which I didn't hear. From where I was standing, you still really couldn't see the baby, because the swing was in the corner of the room facing the outside wall. And so I went over to the baby. He was staring. He had his eyes were open, and he was a blank stare. His pupils were fixed and dilated. I went down to look, listen, and feel, breathing-wise, basic life support. He wasn't breathing, checked his brachial pulse. His arm was cold and stiff, and he had what appeared to be blood around on the side of his mouth. This isn't right. My assessment is this is not a baby who I can do CPR on. I touched his chest. His clothes are kind of crusty, and then he had a blanket that was draped over him, and when I touched that, there was like bugs that came up from that, gnats that flew from that. The whole room was hot, and urine, it smelled, there was a stench of urine in the whole room.
What were his hands like when you saw him?
They were clenched in a fist.
Another first responder was postal carrier Tina Shoddick, who helped Tony Friedrich find the apartment and followed her inside. Tina testified that when it was clear she couldn't help revive Sterling, she went to console his parents. Zachary told her he was sleeping because he worked overnight driving trucks, and Cheyanne woke him, hysterical, to tell him their son was dead. She said he was
quiet, no tears. I would have been hysterical.
The defense asked on cross-examination if Zachary's lack of emotion may have indicated he was in shock. Chickasaw County Sheriff's Deputy Jason Rossell testified that Sterling's bedroom was dirty and unkempt and felt 10 degrees warmer than the rest of the apartment. When the air temperature was measured, a thermometer read 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. A heavy quilt covered the window in the stuffy room.
The room was not very well kept. It was dirty. I could see a bouncy chair, and then of course I could see the motorized swing in the corner. I entered the room to start the investigation. The details at that point that I was getting they weren't very detailed, and so I entered the room to double check baby, and then see what position they were in and start the investigation from there. I immediately noticed that room that the baby was in was felt extremely hotter than the rest of the apartment. It was as if it was 10 degrees warmer. In that particular bedroom, there was a light on the ceiling, no fan, and there was no fan on the floor, no box fan. There was a heavy quilt up against that they had hung over the window. So even if the window was open, there wouldn't have been much air movement. The first thing that I could smell was human urine. When I got closer to baby, I could smell, I guess the only way to describe it is death. The body has started to do what it does when they're no longer living. I also, when I was down on baby's level, I could smell different scents, which later turned out to be candles, or like a candle type air freshener. The first thing I noticed is that his eyes were open, and he had bright blue eyes. His head was tilted. I believe to the left is what I put in my report. And again, when I was down on his level, the smell of urine was so bad that at times I had to hold my breath. The ammonia smelled so bad that you had to hold your breath at times to walk out of the bedroom. Originally, I thought maybe there was a mix-up by dispatcher because it was called in as a 4-month-old, and he did not look like a 4-month-old. He looked more like a newborn. He was very small in size, skinny.
Now, you said that you found some items of clothing underneath and around the swing, correct?
Correct.
Can you describe what those were?
There were numerous blankets directly underneath Sterling in the swing, and I found a pair of newborn or infant pants underneath the swing, which is why I was looking to see if he was pantsed or not. Right behind Sterling, there was a pile of clothes, and they were much too large to be his.
When you touched those items of clothing that were around the swing, what did they feel like?
The blankets and the pants underneath the swing were completely soaked in what I assumed to be urine.
Why did you assume that?
Because of the smell being so bad.
Were they in a position where the urine could have come off of Sterling's body onto some of those items?
Yes, as I stated, there's holes in that swing for this harness to come through. And so it isn't, if you dumped a cup of water in that seat, it would come through those holes. And these blankets were directly underneath where those holes would be.
Did you find any soiled or used diapers in the back bedroom?
I did not.
Did it smell like dirty diapers in the room?
No, just the urine.
The deputy found bundles of fresh diapers, but no used diapers. In front of the swing, he found a bottle containing baby formula that had begun to separate. There was also unmixed baby formula in a cabinet over the kitchen sink, he said. One can was almost empty, but another was 3/4 full. Another state witness on day 1 was Chickasaw County Sheriff's Chief Deputy Reed Palo, who wrote the criminal complaint prior to Zachary and Cheyanne's arrests, and who also attended their son's autopsy. Deputy Palo spoke with Sterling's parents at the scene. The deputy, who was a trained drug recognition expert, testified that Cheyanne did not appear to be under the influence at the time. According to Cheyanne, she had fed Sterling the previous night, before dark, but after Zachary left for work.
I went to speak with the parents to try and determine what had happened. As I turned around, we went into their bedroom, which was the room where Sterling was found was to the right, and their bedroom was to the left. I asked them for identification, and I asked him what had been going on. He said he was in shock. Zach was remarkably stoic or emotionless, or very little emotion showing. Cheyanne was upset and was obviously crying. So we made the decision to disassemble the swing and leave his body in the swing as it was found, and load that whole swing assembly up into a body bag and seal it there. In my training experience, every time we can preserve as much evidence or send as much to the lab as possible, it's going to give them the best view of what we saw, so they can have the most information, preserve as much of the evidence that was there. So we decided that there was nothing stopping us from bringing this whole assembly down there. So we disconnected there was a point where you could take a bolt out to take the swing off of the apparatus that held it. And so we took that, kept him in situ, in the same situation he was in, loaded that in the body bag, and I carried that body bag out, placed it in the van for transport after it was sealed. So they started out by there was a quilt over his lap. Started out by taking that quilt off. And we took each article out, and it was evaluated and photographed. There was a number of articles of clothing in like strata, like layers as you went down into the chair. When we took the quilt off, we observed back at the residence, I'd seen black flies, little small gnat-like flies. But here at the lab, we actually observed what appeared to be maggots or tiny little larvae. They were moving on the skin and in the particles of cloth that we were taking out of the swing.
How many layers did you take off the Sterling?
Well, there was the quilt, then there was a hoodie, and then there was a shirt, and then there was socks and some of those like baby hand cover things that were stuffed down in there. I don't remember the exact number of all the articles of clothing, but
you say stuffed down in there. What do you mean?
It was all saturated and discolored, and kind of a brown liquid had permeated all of the cloth and the fabrics, and it was like, you'd have stuff on top and stuff stuffed around the child. What I had observed was that the maggots were different colors, and there were some that were further away from the body, and then some that were right on the body that were actually still moving. So yeah, as we got down to Sterling, he was wearing a onesie with some pants. It was just a onesie that he had some blood on his mouth, or some, like a dark substance on his mouth, and on this onesie, but it was like stiff. Like if you touched one corner of it, the whole thing would move. And then that was into these pants. I didn't think it could get much worse than it was in the apartment the day before, but it was an acrid, rancid. I've been around dead bodies, and it was different than just decomposition. It kind of was like an acidic. It was really foul. I mean, I'll never forget that smell. It was apparent that there was feces and urine that had been straining through the diaper for a long time, and it was where the diaper contacted the skin, it had compressed the skin. It was definitely indents, and as the diaper came off, you could see the skin had broken down, and even as dirty as it was hard to actually see the skin surface because of the feces and everything else that was there. But you could see that the skin had broken down, and the legs and the waist where the diaper actually contacted was compressed, and it just looked like it had been on there a long time. I was startled by how tiny, how small he appeared to me. Now, I'm not a doctor, but you could see every rib. It was just very skinny arms and legs. Didn't look at all normal, like what you'd expect to see with a baby. And he looked bad before we got the clothing off and stuff, but once we got down, it's really small.
Jennifer Schriever, who babysat for Sterling and his 20-month-old sister shortly after the family moved to Alta Vista in 2017, also testified on the first day of trial. One of the first things Jennifer noticed about Sterling, she said, was how small and light he was. She described Sterling as a clean and happy baby, but she said she noticed he was raw with diaper rash, which she treated while she cared for him. The next time she babysat, she said, Sterling had gained some weight, though not much, and the rash looked better. On August 30th, 2017, Jennifer saw Zachary pacing outside the building, smoking a cigarette, and when she asked what was wrong, he said,
"He's gone. He's just gone." I'm like, "Who's gone?" He's like, "My baby boy is gone. He's just gone." And he's smoking a cigarette outside, and I'm like, "Well, is anybody coming? Did you call 911? And he's like, "We don't know what to do at this point." I was like, "Well, don't you think you should get on the phone and call 911 and put that cigarette out?" kind of thing. And he then, put a cigarette out, went in and called 911.
Jennifer testified that she saw Zachary and Cheyanne about 2 days after Sterling died, walking their dog at a park and talking about funeral plans. Cheyanne mentioned that she thought the police were out to get her, tapping Zachary's arm and telling him they should have taken their daughter and their dog and fled. On Wednesday, October 31st, the first witness was DCI agent James Teal, whose testimony began the previous afternoon. Agent Teal documented the crime scene at the apartment and took a few hundred photos. Also on October 31st, Cheyanne's mother, Brandy Harris, testified about the short amount of time she spent with baby Sterling. Prosecutors believed Brandy was the last person besides his parents and sister to see Sterling alive. Because of harassment and death threats Sterling's grandmother had received on social media, she was permitted to testify without being photographed, although the judge ruled her voice could be recorded. Brandy told the jury about Sterling's birth in a friend's bathtub, which she said occurred because he was 1 or 2 weeks premature. Just a side note here. It's possible the 14-inch length measurement was crown to rump rather than crown to heel, but if this baby really was only 14 inches in total length, he was either a lot more premature than a week or 2, or something Cheyanne did during pregnancy severely stunted his growth. According to Brandy, Zachary helped deliver Sterling and then called her to tell her about her grandson's birth. She rushed to the friend's house and insisted he call an ambulance. Sterling did not stay in the hospital long, Brandy said, adding that there were no concerns about his health. Remember, Zachary told authorities that Sterling was transferred to a second hospital at birth due to water in his lungs. Because Cheyanne was in the hospital, still hemorrhaging after giving birth, Brandy took Sterling to his first and likely only doctor's appointment, at which it was determined the baby was healthy. Cheyanne had told investigators that since he was born, Sterling had not been seen by a doctor. Brandy testified that she held a baby shower for her daughter and Zachary, buying the baby a cake made of diapers, a bouncer, an electric swing, and clothing. She described her grandson as an active baby who appeared to be developing despite his small size, which she attributed to being born early. By mid-July of 2017, Sterling was starting to smile. She had never been inside the couple's Alta Vista apartment, Brandy testified, because she was not getting along with her daughter's boyfriend. Anytime she picked up Sterling and his sister, she met them outside. Brandy described her grandson for the jury. He was a relatively happy baby. She described watching the baby during the Autopsy Days celebration in early August of 2017, at which time, she said, he was his normal self. Brandy learned of her grandson's death when her daughter called her at work. Another witness the same day was another trucker, Zachary's former friend, Jordan Clark, who developed a romantic relationship with Cheyanne after Sterling's death, which apparently Zachary did not know about. Jordan, who sported a curly mohawk, a beard, engaged ears, and had a pretty significant eye twitch, also used to work hauling chickens, although he worked for a different trucking company than Zachary had.
After you met the defendant in April of 2017, did you become friends with him?
Yes.
What did you like about him?
Just kind of personality for the most part.
During all those times that you saw the defendant, did he ever tell you that he had a baby?
Not that I can recall.
He didn't tell you that he had a baby son?
No.
Did you know he had a little girl?
Yes.
Did he talk about the little girl?
Yes.
How often would he talk about his little girl?
At least once a night or every time I see him.
But never about the baby?
No.
What would you do with the defendant when you were at these breaks?
Usually just talk or kill time, just sit around.
Did you ever use drugs?
Yes.
Did you use drugs yourself?
Yes.
What drugs did you use?
Myself, meth.
Did you ever see the defendant use drugs?
Yes.
What drugs did he use that you saw him use?
Meth and cocaine were the main two. A couple of rare occasions was marijuana.
How often would he use the methamphetamine?
Daily.
Did you ever go to his apartment?
Yes.
How many times did you go to his apartment?
Like 2 or 3 times, I believe.
And did you go into one of the bedrooms?
Yes.
And was that Zach's bedroom?
Yes.
The defendant?
Yes.
Did you ever go in the other bedroom?
No.
Did you ever see the other bedroom door open?
Not that I can recall.
What did you do in the apartment?
Mainly just sat around, kind of BS back and forth.
Did you use any drugs at the apartment?
Yes.
Who used drugs at the apartment?
Me and Zach.
How about Miss Harris? Did she use any drugs?
Yes.
The times that you were in his apartment, did you see a baby?
No.
Did anybody talk about a baby being present in the apartment?
No.
Did anybody go in that back room and check on a baby?
Not that I can recall.
Did you hear a baby?
No.
Did you know they had a baby in that apartment?
No.
After Zachary left work on August 30th, 2017, Jordan said, Zachary called him, saying he had misplaced a small black bag containing meth and possibly a scale.
So he called you and told you he was missing?
Yes.
Did he want you to do anything?
Wanted me to check around the truck and in his truck if it was still there, but if he lost it somewhere after that.
And what did you do?
At the time, not knowing for sure what reasonings were, I went and looked for the bag. He made the comment that he needed to find it before anybody else did.
And did you go looking for it?
Yes.
Where did you go?
Across the parking lot to his semi, checked around that area, around where his car usually was parked.
Is that where he told you to look?
Yes.
Did you find the bag?
No.
Did you give him drugs?
Occasionally,
Did you give drugs to him?
yes.
Did you pay him?
Not that I can ever recall.
Did he pay you?
Yes.
How much did he pay you?
$20 to $40 once in a while.
How much meth can you buy for $20 or $40?
Maybe half a gram.
How many people can use a half a gram of methamphetamine?
Possibly 1 to 2, depending on how much they were, how their tolerance are.
How often did he pay you $20 or $40 for methamphetamine?
Usually like once or twice a week when he would run out or come low on his.
How did you learn that the defendant had a baby that had died?
When another coworker called that he passed away.
And when you were told that he had a baby that died, did you know Mr. Koehn had a baby?
No.
Were you confused?
Very.
After Sterling had died, did you have a conversation with the defendant about talking to the police?
Yes.
Tell the jury about that.
Mainly it was just if they call, don't say anything or kind of stretch the truth, so to speak.
The defendant told you to do that?
Yes.
When did he tell you to do that?
That was the afternoon, late morning, early afternoon of the 30th.
Dave Nugent, the owner of Nugent's Nuggets, the trucking company Zachary worked for at the time of Sterling's death, testified by video conference due to a scheduling conflict. The man said he hired Zachary in May of 2017 with a salary of $45,000 per year, and the man gave Zachary some money for his family to live in a motel until they were able to obtain an apartment. Although Zachary was offered health insurance, he declined. Zachary had previously told investigators that the family was covered by the state Medicaid program, so he did not have to worry about medical costs. Mr. Nugent testified that Zachary worked overnights, driving from Charles City to farms in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and southern Iowa, and returning from each trip with a load of chickens. Around the time of Sterling's death, Zachary worked August 27th, 28th, and 29th. He returned to Charles City at 2:36 a.m. and presumably went home after his shift. Also on Wednesday, October 31st, Department of Human Services child protective worker Sheila Schrader took the stand, testifying that her first contact with the family was 2 days after Sterling's death. Initially, she met with Sterling's sister in the foster home where she was staying. Later, Sheila met with Zachary and Cheyanne at the public library.
When you met with Mr. Koehn, the defendant in this case, can you kind of describe his demeanor or how he was acting?
What I recall in the interview, his demeanor presented as that he was laughing in response to our discussion that we were having.
And this was 2 days after the death of his son?
That is correct.
Did you find that unusual?
I did.
Why?
Typically when I meet with families who have a child that suffered maltreatment, they're not laughing. They're either frustrated, they're angry, or they're upset.
And it was so unusual that you noted it in your report, correct?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He explained Sterling's death as SIDS.
What did Mr. Koehn, the defendant, tell you about his illegal drug use?
That he had used methamphetamine.
Why would the department be concerned with a parent using methamphetamine?
Methamphetamine affects how adults parent their children.
How?
It affects their ability, such as if they're using methamphetamine, they may have paranoia, they may have irregular sleep patterns, which results in neglect to a child. They may be irritable. In some instances, they're actively using, they're not able to make inferences, including not focusing on relevant information, just generally poor parenting skills.
And did Mr. Koehn tell you how often he was using methamphetamine?
What I recall in my report is a couple of times a week.
Did Mr. Koehn identify whether or not he provided any drugs to Cheyanne Harris?
He did.
What did he say?
That he gives Cheyanne his leftovers from using his methamphetamine.
When defense attorney Stephen Drahosel cross-examined Sheila, she mentioned the meth discovered in Sterling's umbilical cord test at birth, which would indicate that Cheyanne used meth while pregnant, or that Sterling was somehow exposed to the drug as a newborn.
Was the umbilical cord tested?
It was.
And that test came back positive for methamphetamine, correct?
Yes.
Based on your position as a child protective worker, what does the presence of methamphetamine in the baby's umbilical cord mean?
It means that the mother used methamphetamine during her pregnancy.
Does it also mean that the infant may have methamphetamine present in his or her body?
Yes.
If an infant is born an illegal substance such as methamphetamine in their body, that's grounds for DHS intervention, isn't it?
It is if it's reported to the hotline, yes.
Are hospital employees mandatory child abuse reporters?
Yes.
Would methamphetamine in an umbilical cord qualify as child abuse that should be reported?
Yes.
So is it safe to say that somebody at the hospital did not do what the law required?
Yes.
Agent John Turbett from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation also testified on October 31st and returned the following day. The agent, who interviewed Zachary after Sterling's death, said Zachary told him he arrived home at 4:45 a.m. on August 30th and went to bed after eating grilled cheese with Cheyanne, hearing Sterling crying around 6 a.m. as he was falling asleep, but Cheyanne got up to feed the baby. The agent testified he was told that around 12:40 p.m., Cheyanne woke Zachary, hysterically crying, to tell him Sterling was dead. The previous day before work, Zachary told the agent, he spent the day with his family, watching their daughter's favorite movie, Aladdin. The night before that, he said, before going into work, he played with Sterling in his swing, saying the baby was alert, playing, and grabbing his fingers. According to Agent Turbett, Zachary told him he had never changed a diaper and only occasionally fed his son, which were normally Cheyanne's responsibilities. He cared for their daughter, he said. The last time he fed Sterling a bottle was a few weeks before the baby died. To keep the length of this episode manageable and to maintain my sanity as best I can, I'm going to stop here for the week. In episode 101 next week, I'll pick up where I left off with testimony from Iowa State Medical Examiner Dr. Dennis Klein, who performed Sterling's autopsy. My sources for this episode were the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, the Des Moines Register, the Washington Post, USA Today, Heavy, News 7 KWWL, the Charles City Press, Law and Crime, the Daily Mail, 9ABC, the Globe Gazette, Web Sleuths, American Addiction Centers, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Twitter, Facebook, The Sun, and the Iowa Department of Corrections website. That's it for this week. Join me next week for part 2 of Sterling's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.